Like I say, thank you so much for inviting me along. My job today is to give you, I guess, a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the research evidence. And I'm going to broaden it out a little bit beyond what Anne's been talking about so far. So I want to give you some of the highlights from the research evidence around why it's important to promote sibling relationships when children become involved with the care system, and also to talk a little bit about what we know about some of the challenges around that and some of the things that help in relation to that. And I also want to, I'll tell you a little bit about Stand Up for Siblings as well. A lot of the research that I'm going to talk about today, most of it actually sits on the Stand Up for Siblings website. So if people aren't familiar with that, it's very easily just a www.standupforsiblings.co.uk, and you can go and read some of this research yourself that hopefully will be helpful in terms of maybe your decision making or writing reports. So please, we're always very happy when people use the resources on there. So in terms of the highlights from the research evidence, I guess the first thing to say is that most children who become involved with the care system have siblings, have biological siblings. So we estimate around 90% of those children, which I guess makes it ironic in some ways that often the relationships that sometimes get a bit lost in decision making and lost in things like recording within files or the sibling relationships. So often parent-child relationships really dominate these formal ways of recording children's situations, and sibling relationships get a little bit lost. But most children have them. If we look just at the children who are in care at the same time, then around 3 in 5 children in care at the same time will also have siblings, so very high numbers. We also know from the research that's been done where we've directly spoken to children that children really highly value sibling relationships. They're really very important to them, and one of their greatest worries is often about losing touch with siblings. And of course, everyone here today will know that good practice tells us that where possible and in the best interests of children, children should be living with their siblings, and if that's not possible, should be having contact with their siblings. If we look at some of the outcome research that's been done, that tells us why sibling relationships are important. There's really good, strong evidence now that where there are positive sibling relationships, that really does increase children's well-being, things like mental health, and also things like mental health recovery can be improved where children have really strong, stable sibling relationships. And it seems to contribute to children's resilience when they're faced with particular adversities. We also know that all types of sibling relationships can be important and have these very important outcomes. So I mentioned at the start on slide 1 about biological siblings, but actually lots of different forms of sibling relationship, whether we're talking about adoptive siblings, step siblings, foster siblings, any sort of social sibling, maybe a cousin who's considered to be a sibling by a child. All of these types of relationships that are seen by the child as a sibling relationship can contribute towards these positive outcomes. I'm talking about all of the positive benefits. Of course, we don't shy away from the fact that there will be a small number of sibling relationships that can be harmful for children, but we know again from research that these are a very small number of sets of circumstances. The research that I've done in Scotland with Dr. Gillian Henderson from SCRA, we were looking at children who were moving through the system and a group of children who then went into permanent placement. So whether with kinship carers, with adoptive families, with permanent foster carers. And what was really striking from the work that we did, looking at a number of children's files over time, was the very high numbers of children who did find themselves separated from the siblings. So more than 7 in 10 of the children that we looked at were separated from at least one of their siblings. And a lot of these sibling groups were very large. So, you know, it wasn't unusual to come across sibling groups of maybe 8, 9, or even up to 10 children. And then inevitably what we see is that children are then spread across multiple households, multiple types of placements. And of course, that adds to the complexity in terms of trying to maintain contact, trying to maintain some form of relationship for that set of siblings. We also know from the work that we did and from other work that once children are separated, whatever point that happens in the child's journey, that it becomes much more difficult to then reunite children. So making these decisions really early on and trying our hardest to keep children together in the early part of their journey is so important. We also know from work with our partners, Who Cares Scotland, that their #1 advocacy issue that they deal with is children in care who are finding it difficult to maintain contact with their brothers and sisters. So there are some real challenges here for us to deal with. Again, some more of the challenges, and thinking about the experience of being separated from your sibling. So we talk about trauma that children experience before they come into the care system, but we also know from the direct accounts of children and young people that where they experience a sibling separation when they come into care, or loss of contact, that actually this is experienced as a highly traumatic event for children. So something obviously that we want to avoid at all costs. The other thing that we know is that there's probably more attention on the wee ones in sibling groups. And we found that often older siblings their needs were getting a little bit lost in assessment and planning and decision making. But actually, the older siblings were often the ones, as Anne's mentioned, who might be taking on caring or even a parental role. And often the loss of this role, where that happens, can really be felt very acutely by the older siblings. In terms of children worrying about siblings and where they are and who they're with and are they safe, I think we tend to assume that where there's been a relationship, that there's something there to be lost and to worry about. But actually what was really interesting in the work that me and Gillian did was that we found where even children hadn't ever met a sibling, they just knew they existed. Maybe they'd been born a little bit later, after a child had come in, maybe become looked after away from home, that even in those circumstances, children still worry. Children still have that need for information and reassurance about their siblings, who they are, where they are, who they're cared for, etc. Often, because siblings aren't necessarily included in assessment processes to the degree that we'd want them, in a way that almost has a way of silencing children about their sibling relationships. So they might need more encouragement to ask questions and some encouragement to talk about these sibling relationships, and they'll have lots of gaps in information unless that process is focused on. We also know that so getting information through a third person can be really important for people, for children and young people. But equally, where it's possible for siblings to meet in person, even if that needs to be, you know, in a very safe, supported way, that again, that can really help children make sense of their past, things that have happened to them, make sense of their family relationships, and just have a more secure sense of self. And I spoke a little bit earlier about the positive outcomes that can come from really positive sibling relationships. And again, it's an obvious point to make, but obviously we can't assume that they're always there. There might be some work that we need to do as professionals to help a relationship move from maybe being less positive, less therapeutic, to being a more supportive, safe relationship that children can then thrive within. So I mentioned Stand Up for Siblings. So this is just a slide to show you that, a selection, a range of the partners who are involved with Stand Up for Siblings. So we're really proud of this. I was going to call it an organisation, but we're not an organisation. We're a collection of very committed agencies that really believe that we can do better around supporting and promoting sibling relationships when children come into contact with the care system. I mentioned that we've got a website, so please go and use that website. We are absolutely signed up to keeping the promise, and we will continue to build on some of the changes in law that are happening. We're very committed to helping people in the practice world to you know, reflect on and improve some of the practice that you're involved in day to day with children and families. And I'm not going to say any more about the law because I just want to hand over to Rona from APA Scotland, who I think is going to come in at this point and just say a little bit to give you the background to how the law is changing this summer. So over to you, Rona.
Hello there, can everybody hear me? Great. My picture isn't up because it's quite scary. For some reason, my hair and my eyes are white. So just in case there are any children or people of a nervous disposition, we thought it best for me not to have my picture up. Some people would say I shouldn't in any event, but I'm not listening to them. So yes, there are going to be changes over the summer in relation to the promotion and supporting of sibling relationships. What I'm going to do just now is maybe just go through some of the legal situations that siblings could be in where they find that they are in fact looking after their brothers or sisters, so the sort of sibling kinship carer. It could be that the brother or sister is subject to compulsory supervision order or an interim compulsory supervision order under the Children's Hearing System. And in that case, the sibling would be placed, the child would be placed with the sibling under the looked after child regulations. The sibling then would probably be a relevant person through the Children's Hearing System, and they can ask for reviews, they can appeal decisions, they can have their views heard, and they can attend hearings with a representative. So it may be that the child has been placed with the sibling through the Children's Hearing System. Even where the child is not caring for the sibling, there's an expectation that the sibling's view will be sought and made available to panel members because they are the decision makers. Social work should have presented this at the looked after child review for the child and in their report. Where the sibling acquires parental rights and responsibilities under a kinship care order, that's done through the courts, and this will mean that the birth parents may retain some parental rights and responsibilities. So the same principles apply that would for any other kinship carer, that the sibling carer knows what they can expect from the local authority from the outset. Now, it's not just the financial support and resources moving forward that Anne has talked about, although these are important. Also, at the initial stages, the sibling carer will want to know what the local authority is willing to pay for or contribute in terms of the cost for applying for a kinship care order through the court for that sibling to get the parental rights and responsibilities. They also need to know that if there are disagreements in the future, will the local authority foot the bill if they have to go back to court for the kinship care order to be varied. Now, it's normally what will happen is if it's siblings, they won't be a kinship carer. They themselves will be children who may be in care or who may not be in care themselves. It might be that some of the siblings are in care and some of the siblings are staying with their birth parents. And when we're talking about contact between these siblings, often what happens is that the contact between these two sets of siblings gets lost. The conversation about it gets lost in the clamour of the parents' rights for contact. So it's something we have to be very well aware of when siblings are not living together, but some of them may be living with the birth family. The changes to the law that we have referred to are again about highlighting and supporting and promoting that absolutely essential relationship, and essential for the reasons that Christine has said in relation to siblings. I mean, as you said, siblings are defined as a child who shares at least one biological parent with another child, or there is a separate category of siblings where the child has lived with another child in a sibling type relationship. So that brings into play foster care, children who've been in foster care together, adoptive placement together, you know, so all the different all the kind of different relationships that a child has had, which is of a sibling type. It can be characterised by a sibling type relationship. So from the 26th of July this year, local authorities must place siblings together if the siblings are being put into care, or if there are siblings already in care and other siblings are going to be joining them. They have to be placed together where that is appropriate for the child. If that's not possible, then the siblings have to be placed as close to one another as possible. Again, if it's in the child's best interests. It's very rarely that it wouldn't be in the child's best interests, but you always want to make sure that each child is safe and that decisions are being made that are in the best interests of each individual child. Where the siblings are not placed together, the local authority must promote and support contact between the siblings where that's appropriate, i.e. where it's in the child's best interests. So it's making it very clear that what was good practice before, there is now an imperative. Local authority have got to promote this relationship, and the legislation's been quite clear about how that is going to be achieved, either placing children together, if they're not placed together, making sure that the conversation about their contact is one that is important, and about how to promote that relationship. It may be that the contact can't take place directly, but it's important that they still know who each other is. They still have the opportunity of finding out about each other. And as Chris said, absolutely vital, as children grow up, their needs change, their relationships change, their priorities might change. So it's important that this is constantly reviewed. It might be that the child didn't want to see a sibling at some point, but then when they get older, actually they do. So it's not a box that can be ticked and then walked away from. It's something to be looked at and looked at on a regular basis, because as has been said before, it's probably the relationship that will last the longest in their lives. And they have a right to that relationship, just as we all have as well. So that's all I want to really say about the legal bit. Don't want to get too bogged down, but really just to say that, again, it is something that has been taken very seriously by the legislators. And today in Scotland, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child has been, it's now part of Scots law. So any decisions that are made, or any laws that are made, have got to be consistent with that. And that's a very far-reaching set of rules for people dealing with children, to make sure that their rights are properly respected. So it's all looking good moving ahead, but I have to say an awful lot of that has been because of the tenacity and commitment of the other professionals who have been involved in Stand Up for Siblings. So I'll pass you back over to Simon now. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Rona. That was hugely insightful as always, and the incorporation of the UNHCR potentially has huge avalanche proportions of change that is going to be caused to the benefit of our young people. So that's absolutely fantastic. So thank you to Chris, thank you to Anne so far for their contributions. Thank you to Rona. Thank you to those who are firing messages into the chat. There's been a few comments being popped in there already, which is lovely to see. Please keep doing so. And I would like to just hand over to Kate for her presentation now, please.
Thank you, Simon. I'm just going to build on really from what Chris and Rona have been talking about, but it's focusing on maintaining sibling relationships. And what I'll do is I'll really talk about relationships rather than contact, a word that I'm frequently asking to be removed from every lexicon, but it is a word that people understand within the legal profession. Contact's nice and simple, but I'd like to prefer to talk about relationships because it's the relationship that matters between the children. So I'm just going to try and make sure that the slides change. That would be a good start. There we go. Sorry. So sibling relationships, as Chris and Rona have both said, are amongst our longest lasting relationships, and they contribute greatly to our sense of identity. Research has demonstrated that positive sibling relationships can provide a source of resilience for children facing adversity and provide continuity at a time of change and uncertainty. They can also be a source of support into adulthood. So placing siblings together has been associated with increased well-being and stable, enduring placements. And that's regardless of what the placement is, whether it's kinship or fostering or adoptive, actually having the children together matters. You'll notice that this research is our very own Christine Jones, along with Klein Child Law, who are also another partner of Stand Up for Siblings. So the emotional impact. So sibling separation may well be a common experience, but it's the common outcomes when children, sorry, I'll start again there. So despite the benefits of children being kept together, sibling separation and estrangement are common outcomes for children when they come into the care of local authorities. Research has estimated that around 70% of children in care experience separation from siblings, as Chris has already highlighted in her slides. And where this occurs, children typically express a strong desire to maintain that relationship that they already have. And yet we know the contact varies in quality and tends to become less frequent over time. It drops off the agenda. It drops off adults' agendas in terms of its importance. And it's a source of distress for children, for their carers, and for those professionals who are trying to act on their behalf. So if you see contact between siblings, research is recommending that children should not be separated. And as Rona was saying, this has been highlighted in the Children's Scotland Act, which is coming into force in July 2021. And it will be placing a duty on local authorities when they bring children into care to place them together. Now, this isn't just in regards to fostering. This is in regards to kinship. So if they bring children in together, they need to place them together. And if that's with a grandparent or an older sibling who's been assessed as being able to make that placement viable, then that's what should be considered at all times. So the independent care review is what came before the promise then finally gave us its outcome. And again, it talks very strongly about siblings, about contact, about being able to maintain relationships with one another, and also quite clearly knowing about what's happened to younger children that have come along later. So both Anne and Chris have referred to the fact that it's even children they may never have lived with, but they will know about and will have a concern for and a worry about because of their own experiences. So it must always take into account the existing sibling relationships, possible future sibling relationships, and their voices must be heard. And that just carries that on. It says that you really have to understand again that these relationships might not just be biological. It might be half siblings, which of course is biological, but step siblings, adoptive, foster siblings. If a child's brought into care at the age of 6 months and lives with foster carers until they're 2, they're going to consider that family to have been their family, and the children in that family to have been their brothers and sisters. And it's important to maintain some kind of relationship as they grow, some understanding and knowledge of why they're no longer living with them. So, kinship. So many children find themselves separated due to having different family members. So they could be living with different fathers, or they could be living with their mothers, or their father's extended family, or their mother's extended family, or living with an older sibling. It could even be a very close family friend that has known that family for a very long time. And hence the use of the name of the word kinship. It is about kith and kin. It's about those people that are in our support networks. So there may well be adult relationships that are fraught with difficulties that may get in the way of helping to promote relationships between brothers and sisters. So communication is key. Keeping the child at the centre, making sure they're engaged with and heard, working together to form a working solution that meets children's individual and differing needs. So what's right for one child may not be right for another. And it's about, again, being open, honest, explaining, finding different ways, being creative of how you can meet one child's needs whilst not impacting negatively on another child. As Anne referred to at the very beginning, there is a real lack of research in this area, and we had AFA there was the FACE 19 research that AFA were involved with last year, and that was one of the first big studies that's been done, and that was looking a lot at kinship carers' experiences, especially through COVID-19 and COVID through last year. So this is an area that really is looking for researchers, students, social workers who are interested in broadening their horizons. Get out there and do a bit of research. We're talking to people, talking to children, and talking to kinship carers. Children should know who their siblings are, where they are, and when they will see or have contact with them. This is one of the big issues for all children, whether they come into care of fostering, whether they go into adoption, or they're with family members. They need to know that they are going to be okay, and that that their siblings are going to be okay, and that they know that they are safe, and that they can then have contact with them in a way that meets their needs. It needs to be consistent, it needs to be planned and with everyone's agreement. And carers should not be left to instigate the contact. Anne was talking about if a sibling carer is having responsibility for a smaller child, and they're having to take responsibility for making sure that child has contact with their parents or their grandparents, and those relationships are really difficult. That's unfair to place that responsibility on young shoulders. And it's the responsibility of the team around the child to make sure that there is a shared agreement, and that includes the parents and the grandparents. Everybody should be on board thinking about the needs of the child. There needs to be a collective responsibility. So social workers have a duty under the New Children Scotland Act to promote and maintain relationships. And this applies to all forms of care. So not only do they have a responsibility to try and place them together, or if they can't put them in the same resource, that they are placed close together so they can maintain that relationship. But they also have a duty to make sure that relationship is maintained as they go on. And that duty is actually stronger, as someone was saying, it's stronger than the duty to promote contact between children and their parents. So it's really being seen by the government as a priority, and it needs to be taken into account by all social workers that this is not just about fostering and adoption, this includes kinship. A kinship assessment, as part of that, when that's being carried out, it should be looking at what the sibling contact arrangements are going to be. They should be discussed all the way through. It should be part of the main body of what somebody can offer when they're going to look after a child. And that just really means about having open and honest conversations. I mean, all assessments should be like that, but it is about just trying to draw everybody into keeping around the child. And this is where, when Anne talks about family group conferencing and lifelong links as well, that's a really good place to make sure that everybody comes together and is not feeling threatened or assessed or or even just kind of being blamed, that actually it's really about, let's just put that to the side and think about what's going to be best for this child. So how do we promote and maintain these relationships? Well, how do we do it within our own families? How do we do it within the families that we have, the children who are friends with our children, or the children that we look after? How do we do that? Shouldn't that be the same? Shouldn't it be the same experience for everybody? We need to commit to maintaining sibling relationships wherever they are. And it can be in person, it can be meeting up at the play park, it can be sleepovers, it can be going out for a picnic, going to the beach, or it can be through visual media, through sending cards, letters. Nobody writes letters anymore, but how wonderful for a child to get a letter through the door, even if that letter is a drawing from their sibling. How fantastic would that be? Exchanging photographs. The ideal scenario is for children to experience normal family life, whatever normal is in your lexicon. But yeah, can they meet up in other people, in each other's homes? Can it be that supportive network where if one child's in foster care and one child's in kinship, the people can work together so that there's an exchange of a play date, and not talking about sibling contact? So again, these are the kind of conversations that need to be addressed right at the beginning. It shouldn't be left until assessments have been completed, the child is moved. It needs to be addressed right from the beginning. And let's remember those children who aren't in under formal LAC regulations. So those children that go into kinship placements very early on, and therefore aren't subject to children's hearings or a LAC review. Again, it needs to be right at the core of the kinship care assessment, and then any kinship care order, that these relationships are going to be maintained. So as we know, through COVID, we've all become aware of what it's like to not be able to have contact with other people face to face. And this is the same for children who've been removed from birth parents or birth families, that it maybe contact cannot be in person due to identified risks, or maybe it's just because of geographical distance. So we've learned very quickly, I think, over the last year. I've had this slide for a couple of years now, but we've learned this far more. You talk to people about using Skype or FaceTime or Teams or Zoom, and everyone's like, yeah, we know what we're doing now. And there used to be a real fear about this, but actually it's great, and children seem to respond really well. It must be noted, though, that not every child will feel comfortable being on a screen. And for small children, it might be 10 seconds enough to wave and then run away again is enough for them. They've made that contact. For some children, the fact that they're in a safe space with their carer, and that video contact brings that person into their safe space, might not necessarily be the greatest idea. So it's about thinking outside the box again. How can we manage this? And sometimes just asking the child. Children can be a great source of information, and they know themselves, and it's just about helping them to express that. It should always be reviewed. Anne said that as well, and this is the case for all children, because they change in 6 months, they change in a year, and what they wanted yesterday they don't want tomorrow, and that's not just about what they want to eat for their tea. So it is about what they're going to do and how they're going to cope. And this is something that's really common for all children when they're very tiny. Whatever placement they go into, you've got to revisit it, because they have a better understanding as they get older, and they have a different view, and they need to be supported and heard. And they also need to have it explained to them about why maybe they can't have what they want, so that they have an understanding. Trust will only grow if the children feel that they're not being lied to. So sorry, there's probably a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Normally I can talk for hours, but it's just really just to say that children's voices must be heard. Chris referred to Who Cares. One of the biggest issues that they have in Who Cares is young people saying we want to know where our younger brothers and sisters are. We don't know where they are. We haven't heard from them in years, or maybe two youngest ones were adopted and we don't know where they are, or that one went to live with their dad, but we didn't have any contact with them because that was so. So for young people going forward throughout their lives, their adult lives, their brothers and sisters are just so important to them, and that is then going to have a major impact on them as adults moving into society and then as parents themselves. So we have to take the long-term view rather than the short-term. This isn't practicable today. Well, we need to review it every time we are coming together to talk about how the child is doing. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm going to hand you over to Anne Begbie.
Hi folks, hi. I'm going to have Simon moving the slides around here because I'm working at home and working on an iPad for Zoom because Edinburgh Council doesn't allow us to use Zoom on our laptops. So I'm kind of working between two here. So Simon's going to be my fantastic assistant. I don't have a lot of slides actually, do I? And maybe I have more than others. I suppose I'd just like to say, having really great presentation, Kate. I'm coming at this slightly different angle. I'm a practitioner, hands-on, working in family group decision making in Edinburgh. Excuse me. And you will have heard people, I think Anne and Kate, both refer to family group conferencing. In Scotland, we made a conscious decision to dump the conferencing word and call it family group decision making. We felt conferencing was too formal, too much in the system. So we do try and sit to kind of at the side of that. So again, this is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I do have a couple of little film clips to show you, which I hope will bring some of what I'm saying to life. So in short, I will talk a bit about where Edinburgh's journey, actually, we do like the journey word, about and really having children, their families, their family network and citizens across Edinburgh at the centre of that planning and decision making. So, excuse me, that's the first thing I'll do. The second bit is I'll just go into a little bit more detail about what a family meeting is. So family group decision making, it's a very specific model and Edinburgh has been committed to that for a long time. And then I'm going to show you a little film and just to give you an idea of how family group decision making fits in to some of the other services that are around. And then I'm going to move on to another little bit of the service that we offer, which is lifelong links. And I know Kate and Chris and Anne have all made reference to that already. So and that's been my kind of bread and butter, I guess, for the last 5 years, is developing that service in Edinburgh around lifelong links. Threaded through this are kinship carers and brothers and sisters, whether they're kinship carers or brothers and sisters, and in all shapes and forms. That's kind of key to what we do. Simon, can you put the second slide up, please? Woohoo, look at that. So we love a path and we love a journey, so I felt I had to put one on. So you need to cast your mind back a bit, for some of us that have been around for a longer time, but way back in Edinburgh's had a family group decision-making service for about 17 years now. There's no exact date, but it's around 17 years, and I've been part of that team for coming up 13, 14 years. So there's always been a commitment, albeit then the team was tiny. And then things took a real shift, and that's why I've put this path up, or different pathways around the time of financial crash. And we were a tiny team at that time. There was kind of three full-time equivalents, kind of flying the flag for, allowing families' voices to be heard and having family meetings. And that at that moment in time, there was the conversation opened up much more to pushing forward as much more of a kind of restorative council, a kind of much more empowering to families and citizens. Participation. Edinburgh developed this framework called Balance of Care, where we were actively trying to balance and make sure that if we needed to move kids into care, we got the right kids, and actually we were having a much harder look, sometimes quite uncomfortable look at families, and rightly, this is a rights-based model, and we wanted to get in there and make sure we were kind of turning over every stone and finding the families and the connections that we wanted for the kids that we were looking after. Around the time, this goes way back, some people will remember the Christie report, which spoke about doing things with people and not to them, and that is a mantra in Edinburgh. It's taken a bit of time, we're now 20 years on, that was 2001. The 21st Century Review of Social Work, which was around, we can't continue to deliver things the way we're doing, one, because they're not working particularly well, they're not cost effective. And now we have the promise landed on our lap, and I have to say that was written for family meetings. I mean, it's just a perfect piece of legislative background where, you know, it just smacks of family meetings, family relationships, family life, lifelong connections, and families voices, and young people being at the centre, hearing their voices, and the centre of decision making. I think it was Anne that was talking about, you know, that we need to actively explore and search for family, and that is absolutely the bread and butter of a family meeting, and lifelong links, which I'll come on to. So I guess when I'm talking today, I just really want you to think about some of these things and kind of try and relate that to your own situation, your back, whether it's professional or you are a kinship carer, you know, and maybe hopefully some of this will raise some kind of curious questions, which is always what we're trying to do. You know, how would this fit into what I do? I am only talking about Edinburgh. I've only ever worked in Edinburgh, but there are other services across the country in terms of doing this work. But it's how it fits in with your world, I guess. And you know, if you want to push this forward, a couple of good examples. There's Glasgow in the last 3 years has developed a family group decision making service. And just been taken a really bold move and moved 20 social workers from frontline work to do family meetings. So I think that's out there. The other people that might be worth looking at, if people are interested in the bigger picture and how this has developed. Leeds, about 10 years ago, got a shocking Ofsted report, and again just decided to do something very different and moved to a much more restorative way of working, and kind of, you know, handing some of that power and control back to families. So family group meetings, I guess, without a shadow of a doubt, a bit of a leap of faith for somebody and for people, and even in Edinburgh we still have some battles with some workers who are reluctant. It's all I can say is a leap of faith. So just before I go into a wee bit more about family meetings themselves, I just want you to have a little think yourselves. I won't ask you to feedback on this, but just think about if somebody in your family, it could be you, a child, a partner, a parent, anybody, if there was a decision or a plan needed to be made about that person. So if they needed to go into care, if they needed extra support at home, if you know, things weren't going well, who would you want at the table making these plans and decisions? Who would you want around that table? And it's a question I ask a lot of people, just to get people in that headspace of actually, yeah, who should be making the decisions? So I'll just give you 10 seconds to have a wee think about who would you want at a family meeting that was about your family, about somebody that you love and care for. So I'm going to hazard a guess that most of you would come up with your partner, your immediate family, your best friends, maybe somebody from the church, maybe somebody from a youth group you're involved in, maybe lots of people. Very few people will say, I would want a social worker there, a policeman, maybe, you know, or professionals. It tends to be we're looking for these people in our families that are going to be the strongest and most supportive of us. And that really is, again, the bread and butter of family meetings is helping families identify these people. And they're the strengths, they're the strong people that are going to carry that family and kind of support when support's needed. Simon, can you put up the next slide, please? So, family meetings, family group decision-making, it's about it's an alternative decision-making model. Okay, so it's really clear with the family at the centre. I guess across, just a little bit of background, across England, there's over 90% of local authorities in England have a family group decision-making service, either delivered in-house or delivered by a third sector. Very often in Scotland, that's Bernardo's or Children First. There's a Scottish network of family group coordinators, there's a national network of family group coordinators and services, and there's a European network as well. So this is a well-established model of working. So just so people don't think this is something new, it's been around for a long time, 30 years in New Zealand, which is where this model originated from. And there's also the American Humane Society, who also do family meetings and are involved. So it is a decision-making model, and as I've already said, it's known as family group conferencing in other countries, but Scotland made a very clear decision about dumping that word. In Edinburgh, we have our main service, it's just called FDGM. Beyond that, it's broken into various bits. We have specifically a baby service, and one of the films I'll show you is around that service. So we target any vulnerable pregnancy or child under a year. That's a mandatory referral to our team. There's no gatekeeping by social workers. We hear of pregnancies, and it's an offer to a family to have a family meeting. We try and target initial child protection case conferences. We have a strand of our work that is looking at children that are poor attenders at school, so that's our kind of school matters part. We have another little kind of pilot on the go just now looking at getting into children's hearings or diversion from children's hearings. So that's a kind of work in progress, and that's been taken kind of on nationally as well, supported by the Scottish Steering Group. We have for a while been working with adults, so health and social care cases. We've had 2 members of our team who've come from health and social care, and we also do lifelong links. I don't have time to go into all of these, and I'm sorry if this one's a bit of a and you're getting loads of stuff flung at you, but hopefully it will all become a bit clearer. So these are the kind of options. Anywhere a plan or decision could be made, a family meeting is generally quite a good option. So we are trying to get in at every time to give the family their voice and get their plan up and running so that they've got theirs, and that should marry with whatever a social worker's plan is. In Edinburgh, we link into all practice team work. The biggest number of referrals for us come from practice team workers, and these are generally around children who are families who need a bit of support at home, really. So there's a lot like that, just at that level. So you're just trying to pull the family in together, the network in together, who's there, who can support, and try and get over that kind of either crisis point or just a bit of a glitch in the way things are working for that family. We link in with family-based care. So some of these babies that get flagged up through, generally through health, that there's pregnancy, we link in with family-based care, and they'll kind of contact us and say we're aware that a social worker potentially is looking for a placement for a baby. We're linked into the kinship care team, and that should be part of any kinship assessment, is that there's a discussion around would a family meeting be appropriate in this case. And I suppose that links to some of the other cases where there's social worker and practice team might be working with a case, is concerned that a child or children may need to be accommodated. So can we have a family meeting? One, to kind of support the family. There's very often a plan A at family meeting, and there's a plan B. Sometimes there's plan C and D. But A would be, how can we support these children to stay at home? Plan B being, if they can't stay at home, who in the family could put themselves forward as a kinship carer. And just linking into some of the earlier conversations, that will also be older brothers and sisters. That's a really common thing for us. And I totally get these arguments about age and how old does a person need to be before they can be assessed as a kinship carer. But these are things that within the family group decision making model can be addressed by the family, and it's giving them that opportunity to do it. So I'll just flip my notes over, because I've got lots of notes, because as my colleagues Chris and Kate know, I can talk a lot. I'm also conscious that Anne said 2 or 3 times, Anne second Anne will talk about that. So please hold me to task, Anne, if you've said I'll say something and I don't, pull me up at the end. So family meetings, helpful really anytime, support when a young person's living at home, but things aren't going brilliantly, exploring these family links for kinship, brothers and sisters. And some family meetings are plain simple contact family meetings, just about some of what Chris and Kate have said already. When families are kind of fragmented and relationships are a bit fragile, how can we pull people together in a way that's empowering and they feel kind of in control of it? You know, that there's kind of 3 mantras to a family meeting. One is it's blame free, and Kate mentioned that, you know, and family meetings start at that. That's where we start. These are blame free and future focused. We're not dragging up a lot of some really not nice stuff that's happened before. It's like, can we draw a line in the sand and move forward with this? And the third one is children should be at the centre of family meetings, and we would absolutely advocate that children should always attend family meetings, either supported by somebody in the family or with an independent advocate. But we want to hear children's voices. It's not a family meeting if we don't. So when else might family meetings be helpful? Just that decision, and I think again somebody's mentioned, if a decision is a family meeting comes together and the family decide that actually nobody in that family can care for a baby, that's a really tough decision. But I believe, and I know a lot of my colleagues believe, that if that's a shared decision by the family and the decision makers and social work, then we move away from that blame, the kind of blame game, and actually people own that decision. It's the right decision for a youngster. And I think it was Anne that mentioned about, you know, recording later on, at least somewhere in a child's file it will say, you know, we asked to have a family meeting, we had a family meeting, and the family decided, your family decided, actually this was not going to work really. So I think that's a much kinder way to work with children and leave children. I think increasingly in Edinburgh, and I'm sure this is mirrored across the country, we request for youngsters to read their files, and I think some of what is written in there is so unhelpful, or not written in there is so unhelpful, and I think we need to be a lot better at that, which is one of my kind of fight for that one. But I think, you know, we need to be leaving enough information for youngsters, but also that if some of these, if it is a kinship placement that's identified through a family meeting, then we're able to build in that support of the kinship placement as well. Sometimes, you know, we can have had kinship placements that are ticking along quite nicely, and then they hit a glitch and a bit of difficulty. So it's again pulling that network around the kinship family to kind of to support the kinship placement as well. I think we'll just move on to Azaria's story. I think this hopefully, oh, there's one more slide. Sorry, Simon. There's another, flick through this slide. Yeah, so I've said that. Plans and decisions, yeah, I've said that. We can slip. So this will be good if you get these slides. These are the bits you need to remember. Can you flick through the next one, Simon? Thank you. And just a very brief look at the model. So very clear, simple referral. Preparation time is the biggest part of a family meeting, where a coordinator needs to go out and meet everybody that's coming to that family meeting. Clearly this year has been slightly different. It's all been done on Teams, but we would want to eyeball everybody, get their thoughts and views, and pull all that together so you've got a shared agenda when you come to the family meeting. There should never be any surprises when it comes to the actual family meeting, that people are kind of on the same page, and throughout that preparation stage you've ironed out some of the difficulties. So again, I think it's been mentioned, but we are sometimes bringing together kind of almost warring families, you know, that are, and there's children caught in the middle of that, and we're trying to kind of pave the way, I guess. The actual meeting, so there's three bits to start. The actual meeting is split into 3 other sections. An information sharing part where the professional, whoever the referring worker is, would be at the beginning to kind of lay out the bottom line, maybe things that can't be decided or planned for by the family if there's specific conditions around a court order or anything like that. And a chance for the family, and I keep saying family, but the family network, to ask questions of the professional as well. There's usually only one professional at a family meeting, occasionally two, shouldn't really be any more than that. It's not a professional meeting. And then comes the crunch time where the coordinator and the professionals there leave the meeting, and it's private family time that makes a family meeting a family meeting. So it's just the family, maybe an advocate if there's an advocate involved, but there's nobody else in that room, and the families are left with paper and pens and time and space to have these conversations that a lot of us will just have around our dining room tables. But for us, and we're facilitating that for some families that have just got a bit stuck and just aren't able to do that. And we're asking that family to come up with their plan. What would they want to see happening and how they're going to do that? There's a big bit about detail in that, and about, I think Anne or somebody was talking about realistic plans and realistic expectations. It's another thing as a practitioner, you hear yourself saying to families all the time, because sometimes at these moments of crisis, if it's talking about a new baby, maybe moved out from birth family, then families will offer things that actually are quite unrealistic. So it's the coordinator's job to try and pull that in and make them see that realistic bit. And then there's always an offer of a review meeting. And we do have families that will have a family meeting and a review meeting, and things will take along for a couple of years and they'll come back and we'll have another meeting, and that's fine. I think this should be seen as something that families can dip in and out of throughout that whole journey, the journey word again. There's not going to be one family plan. I think Kate was talking about, youngsters change, they change who they want to see, they change who they want to be with. So we need to be able to kind of adapt to that. Next one, Simon, thank you. So family meetings, absolutely a voluntary process. There is no families do not have to have a family meeting. And that's why we ideally want to get out to families to give them that offer. Coordinators are absolutely independent. We're not part of any other assessment or decision-making process. We don't go to look at LAC reviews. We don't go to children's hearings. And we don't ask for any, we don't get any access to SWIFT, or electronic recording system in Edinburgh, and we don't have any master assessments. We don't get into these things at all. We go with just the questions that are being asked of the family. What is it that the family are being asked to kind of come up and decide and plan for? And I've already said private family time is essential. You can't have a family meeting without private family time. Simon, the next one, please. So, Azaria's story. Hopefully this will bring some of this together. So Azaria was a young woman who was pregnant, and she'll talk about her own story. Just to say that this was done, it was a kind of collaboration between Edinburgh City, our team, family decision making, the practice team worker who was actually a hospital-based worker, and Edinburgh University, and it's Dr. Mary Mitchell who was pulling this together. Mary did her PhD around family decision making, so we've got very strong links with Mary, and this is one of the bits that's come out from here. So I'm going to let you sit back a wee bit and listen to Azaria's story, and I'm hoping that it makes some sense and pulls things together. I'll just say as well, Azaria's, think about the kinship options, that plan A, plan B bit. There was obviously a plan A, but plan B was, I know for a fact, without a doubt, looking at kinship options. So it's 6.5 minutes long.
Simon, I'm not hearing any sound on that. Simon?
Are people saying that they can't hear it, or?
Yeah, we can't hear it, Simon.
Okay.
It did work earlier.
Okay, talk amongst yourselves, everybody, while I just resolve this. And it was all going so well.
I'm looking away because I don't want the story to get, I don't want it to be spoiled if there's a surprise.
You don't want it spoiled.
No. Who did this, Anne? Was it?
Us with Edinburgh Uni.
Right.
Yeah, so Mary and our team and the hospital-based team. It links to some work Mary's doing around recognition theory as well.
What's that?
How you're recognised in the system, she says.
Right.
It's, yeah, interesting stuff. And just, yeah, that invisible bit. And I guess that's some of what we're talking about is how we make families more visible and kinship carers more visible and brothers and sisters more visible within a system. In fact, I think I'm just suddenly realised I've skipped a slide as well, which will come up. I'll talk to that just now. There's quite a nice slide which I've put in my presentation, which is around that bridge between the kind of professional world and the family world, and where family meetings fit into that. It's a great way of just a visual of how family meetings are seen and how it can bridge that gap. So the bridge, it was developed by the Netherlands, who are big on family meetings.
Yeah, that would be really interesting because, I mean, they are called family meetings, but sometimes you think they're professional meetings that the family are allowed to
absolutely.
You know, and if it's more sort of family centric and they're sort of leading it, people are becoming more aware now of what their rights are and that they have that right to be listened to.
Yes. I mean, it's not uncommon for us to begin that preparation stage of a family meeting and the family actually just get themselves together and write their plan. And it doesn't, you know, because you're getting in there at a time and they're motivated to do it. And that, I mean, that's great. That's what you would want. We also actively encourage self-referrals. You know, we ideally don't want this to become, that's certainly Edinburgh's view. We don't, you know, it'd be great if we got more self-referrals. And people would just, you know, recognise the need for it and go, you know what, we could do with a family meeting and self-refer. I think that'd be a great way to go.
Yeah.
But we do get self-referrals. But it's but the Netherlands is an interesting model. Netherlands run their model much more on a kind of similar to our children's hearing system.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, where coordinators like me would be like a volunteer, like a panel member essentially. So they're trained and then they're managed kind of by one person, but there's kind of almost like a virtual team of coordinators.
And would they make a decision the way that the panel members in the children's hearing would?
No, because you're only asking the families to come up with a plan. So there's no, no, it's just you're doing the coordinating role, but much more in a kind of voluntary basis, much more community-led, ground-up type of, rather than top-down.
I remember hearing that somebody went across to, it was a law lecturer went across to New Zealand and Australia, and they really didn't want to, as soon as they heard they didn't have family mediation, they weren't interested in the Scottish system at all. They could not understand how it could be professional-led, and that was about 20 years ago. How are things going, Simon?
Well, shall we try it again?
Yay!
Yeah, if it doesn't work this time, we could always send a link if it doesn't. But let's
absolutely. Share the link anyway, because I think people will watch it once, but I hope would want to watch it again. Yeah, that's not a problem at all.
I have a feeling that the problem might have been because I muted myself, which might have just affected the settings, and it's obviously taken me 15 minutes to actually find the setting that I needed to readjust to get myself back on again. So let's see how it goes. And you watch, the dog will go crazy in the middle of this as well, just to annoy him. Okay. Fingers crossed, everyone. Sorry.
Okay. Excellent.
I started using when I was 15 and in an abusive relationship. I was with him for 7 years. I left the relationship and the abuse.
No, Simon, we're not hearing it again.
I had been using heroin for 9 years.
I'm hearing it. I don't know, maybe if it's because...
Oh, somebody else can.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because you're...
Oh, keep playing it then.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Me too.
Yeah.
Oh, it's maybe because we're presenting.
Yeah. Keep
going. That's fine. Keep
Simon.
going. Keep going.
That shouldn't be a hiccup. That shouldn't cause it, but we'll go for it anyway.
Years and
yeah, absolutely.
All I could think about was more drugs. The lows were unmanageable. So I would go out and beg and get more money. And because I was young and I was a female, I could get lots of money. It was a constant cycle. Me and my partner ended up in a B&B where there was drugs all around me being used or sold. There was no escape. The day I fell pregnant was the day I stopped using crack. When I fell pregnant, I immediately thought about a termination. I just knew I couldn't do it. I felt panic and happiness, but the happiness faded when I thought about how I was going to do this and how I would support a baby. But when I was told that I could not have my child, that changed things. We both knew I was pregnant immediately. Alec was so pleased, and I felt like I just didn't have a choice because he wouldn't consider an abortion. I texted my mum and I hadn't spoken to her for 2 years. She didn't want to get involved at the time because it would be too hurtful for her to lose a grandchild. I felt so alone. I got lots of different advice and I didn't know what to do. I knew it was going to be so difficult to imagine what would happen. Looking back, I wondered if I was trying to sabotage a pregnancy by continuing to use, so I wouldn't have to face the decision to have my child taken away from me. The first agency I encountered told me I would not be able to keep my baby. Every time I would leave that office, I would go home in tears.
So I've just paused that because there seems to be quite a bit of chats that some people can hear it and some people can't hear it.
Okay.
So I think it's probably best on balance for maybe not to inflict 6 minutes of silence on people. And possibly, yeah. Sorry, it was working.
It did work.
I think, Simon, if given the time as well, I think what we should do is just pop the links in the chat if we can.
Yeah.
And then you can watch it at your own leisure, given that the time of day as well. So, and what we could do is maybe Anne go back to your presentation and just
absolutely.
So that you can complete that. Sorry about that.
No, sorry about that, folks. That's a real shame. But you'll get the links out so you can watch it, and if people have got questions, I'm more than happy to come back to me. So let's mix it about a bit. Simon, could you flick to the next slide is just the bridge that I was talking about when we had the gap. So that's a nice one for people to look at and think about in terms of where family meetings sit and why we're really actively looking for family. Right, next one. We change a scene here. It's another picture. And some people might recognise this. So this is Register House, Scotland's People, at the end of Princes Street, and you probably walk past, well, a lot of people won't walk past it this year. However, it's there, and that's been a source of absolute joy for our team in terms of finding families and finding people that are important to the young people that we're working with. So I've got a little story here just to kind of highlight how Edinburgh, I've almost kind of embedded that searching for families and making sure we've got the right people around the table to make plans and decisions. I'm conscious of the time. Somebody give me, oh no, we're fine. So I suppose our team I've always been very curious. We're a group of curious people, and we do sometimes ask difficult questions of social workers and who are our colleagues. I think that's right and proper. And it's generally that bit about trying to kind of fill gaps or gaps in information or assumptions that some workers make that actually, family are not appropriate, or there's no family, or sometimes workers will say, I know all the family. So some examples, or an example that's come to our team was where we were aware that there was, it was another baby that was born. born 18 months after a brother. That brother had been through the system and was adopted, and the second child, 18 months later, well, a different social worker who asked kind of slightly different questions and approached our team and said, you know, a family meeting might be good to see if we've missed anybody. And in fact, we had missed somebody. And the person that we'd missed was an auntie, a full auntie of both children. And she was also a kinship carer for another child in her family. But suddenly we had a child who had been adopted at 18 months and away from the family. Suddenly we had this new baby looking for a family placement, and this woman who was already kinship carer for another child. And that, no surprise, raised lots of questions and how that was even possible, including from the auntie who's saying, how's this come about? So that started us beginning to think, actually, we don't have enough information about family, and we don't research enough information about family to be making really life-changing decisions for some of the youngsters that we work with. So this is Registered House. So that has become a source of me spending quite a lot of time there, and some of my colleagues spending quite a lot of time there doing fully researched family trees. And it's one of our aims in Edinburgh is that every child that comes into our system, whether looked after at home, which is a bigger ask, but certainly kids that are going to be living away from home, that we are doing a properly researched family tree, and that would be with them forever. And it's not a case of a worker reading through case notes and trying to piece together who's there and who's not. So Simon, the next one. I'm conscious of time, so I want to rattle through some of this. So part of our referral form for placements, so if a social worker is making a decision about a placement, has there been a discussion? And this was classic: there are no appropriate family members who care for this child. And that for me is immediately a red flag, saying, have we really checked? Have we really looked hard enough? Have we lifted every stone? Have we asked this family to say, yes, I can, or no, I can't? And that's fine. I wouldn't shy away from that question. Kinship care not being considered, and clearly line manager agreement, I suspect not. We do get these ones that come through that have not actually had that conversation. So next, so this was, yeah. So sorry, Simon, the next one, we move on to a bit of a family tree. So this is a bit closer to home. You'll spot the surname. So one of my colleagues is at Registered House, and there's something about, back to that exercise when I said, who would you want to have around the table? This is true. This is true. We have unborn baby Begbie. 2 previous siblings adopted. Mum is having a 3rd baby, different social worker asking different questions, and asked the same question of the example I just gave. You know, what do we know about this family? What do we really know about this family? Could we do a family tree? My colleague goes to Register House and phones my office to say, is your husband Alan John Begbie? And I said, yes, he is. And I was told that the child that they were looking at was related to us. So in actual fact, it's my husband's dad's sister. So my husband's aunties, it was that side of the family. And we knew the cousins on that side, but beyond that, it was a bit of a, didn't really know. But this flagged up, and bearing in mind that referral was like, there are no appropriate family for this baby, it opened up conversations within my family around, I spoke to my nieces, I've got 3 nieces and a nephew who are all of an age where they could look after a little one. And I have to say, after initial shock, I was also willing to consider taking that baby, much to my husband's shock and horror. However, this unravelled, and we were having lots of conversations. But interestingly, my nieces and my nephew all said we would take this baby. And it's back to that whole bit about we didn't know this baby, we didn't know this side of the family particularly well. However, everybody, I would argue, on my side of the family were appropriate to at least be considered. And actually, as a family, we wanted to consider that, and we did. Simon, the next picture. This is a lovely one. Look, in the days when we could travel, so this is my family. So I would challenge anybody to say, are we appropriate or are we not? I do have a bottle of beer in my hand, And as is the middle of the day in Italy, in Rome, going to the Six Nations. However, I just want you to think about that. And when we're making decisions and thinking about family, we need to turn every stone. Ultimately, the decision for our family, or not for our family, the decision was with our family and with the social worker that this wee new baby into that family went with his other 2 adopted siblings. And that was fine. That was reconciled, and that was a decision. But we were part of that decision-making process, and we've also left that in the baby's file. And for the other children that we know that part of the family, we know enough, and we knew Auntie Jeannie, my husband's auntie, that we could pass on some of that information. So that's going to link to some of the stuff, obviously some of the stuff that Anne's spoken about, and Chris and Kate around brothers and sisters and that family history and that sense of identity and all the things go with it. Right, I'm conscious of the time. I'm going to do a quick 5 minutes or so on lifelong links and then leave time for questions and answers. So next slide. So lifelong links, and this is something Chris said as well about that kind of that sometimes families and young people need help to reconnect. They need a bit of support and advice and guidance and a bit of just taking somebody along with them to make these connections again. Lifelong links is specifically around trying to keep kids and connected to the people that are important to them. So youngsters that come into care, whether that's kinship or adoption or long-term fostering or whatever, we are trying to keep kids connected, make sure we identify the right people and keep them connected. And it also links to what people were saying about that will change. I think it was Kate was saying it needs to be reviewed time after time because that will shift. This is, again, it's a process. I see it as a process throughout the child's life. And I did mention health and social care earlier, and it's also a theme in health and social care. So these, adults who have been separated from siblings, brothers and sisters early on in life are still searching for them and not quite sure how to broker these relationships. And that's where lifelong links comes in even in later life. And you just need to watch long lost families to see the importance of that and just how difficult it is for some people to kind of make that jump. So we're there trying to facilitate that. Very much, I'm a coordinator, the same as I would for a kind of normal family meeting, but lifelong links is just sitting a bit separately. So we're trying to kind of build on that. We have been part of a national trial. It was an idea that Edinburgh had around this whole question about saying people don't have family, and we're like, yes, they do. And actually, when you start searching, there are any number of people, some that kids don't know about, some they do know about, but they've lost contact with. And it's trying to find them and identify them. So the national trial has been 8 local authorities up and down the country, 2 in Scotland and 6 in England, linked to Family Rights Group. So we have completed the first 3 years of our trial, and we're now in the last 2 years, and that's been evaluated by Celsius. So I would watch that space. It's going to be really interesting. We did kind of pinch a bit of the model from Kevin Campbell. I don't know if some of you might have heard of him, and he's now in partnership with Andrew Turnell, who's the Signs of Safety man. So they've created a programme. Kevin Campbell's is much more ferocious, and they use private detectives and all kinds, and they're trying to place quite teenagers, so quite difficult to place teenagers. They're trying to find family to kind of take them. I suppose the other bit that's behind this and behind Edinburgh's development of lifelong links is a report by Lord Farmer around prison population. And we also recognise in Edinburgh that kind of care leavers are the biggest majority. I think 47% of youngsters in Pullman are care leavers. And the difficulty with that is, and what Lord Farmer identified was that a lot of these youngsters have no connections. Actually, they've been through our care system, but we've broken a lot of these connections, these family connections and network connections that would have been there had they not been in care. Our system breaks relationships a lot of the time and doesn't support them. So, and Lord Farmer talks about that revolving door, because youngsters are coming out of Pullman to nothing and going back in and then coming out to nothing. So actually, if we can build these connections, so we're looking for the strong, able people within their networks to support them. And that's a big part of that, is the kind of kinship group around a youngster. And I think Chris and Kate have both spoken about why it's, you know, so important. It's around mental health, just well-being, but a sense of identity, about your own family history, that shared history. So we're doing this. Yeah, we've got lots of cases going through just now. We use a number of different tools. I'm not going to go through these today. We have a Facebook page. We will contact people on Facebook. It's a closed page. We will cold call some people. We will use deep file searches. We use Trace Genie. We have ancestry.com. We've got our colleagues at Register House. And yeah, that's where we're at with lifelong links. There is another little film which I would love to share with you, which is a story, Sandy's story, and it's Sandy's journey through lifelong links. And Sandy's been involved with us for about 5 years, with us, and very much a process, picking off just one person that had been in Sandy's life and then another, but the biggest part is around finding Sandy's brothers and sister, 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. The younger sister that she never lived with, Sandy never lived with, but the brothers Sandy did live with, they were adopted and Sandy remained in long-term care. It'd be great if we could see that. Not sure. Give it a go. Have we got time? Sorry, Anne, have we got time, or would you rather people just watch it in their own time?
I think we should watch it in our own time in case it doesn't play again.
Okay.
And because I'm conscious that we've talked a lot today, so
Yeah,
just in
absolutely.
case there's some questions
Really
that we might want
questions. Yeah, go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Anne. I wish we could play.
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. It just stops me droning on.
Are we done with the slides, Anne?
I think so. Yeah. Let's go back and let's take some questions. I think would make more sense.
Okay. Right, so let me just get back to where I need to be. When I was sharing screen, it was difficult for me to keep an eye on Q&A and chats, but I think, Anne, you've managed to put the links in from Sandy's story and the last video as well. We had the issues as well, so I would recommend everybody goes and hunts those out and looks for them. They are absolutely fantastic. You may need a hanky, especially for the first one, I would suggest. But okay, so right at the very beginning, there was a chat. In the chats, there was a question that came in regarding, in fact, actually, the chat has kind of disappeared a little bit from the beginning for me to be able to have a look at that. But basically, it was on the back of something Anne Tom was speaking about, and it was referring to the age of when children could actually be considered for part of their role as siblings and so on and so forth if they're experienced in the care system. So I don't know if you maybe want to talk about that a little bit, Anne, if possible, or if the other panelists want to feed into considerations around age for siblings.
Yeah, of course. So I suppose legally, you know, if a child is 16, they're classed as an adult, but if the child is actually under a CSO themselves, they would still be classed as a child until they're 18. So that could become incredibly difficult if they do want to become a kinship carer. Having looked at different kinship policies, this varies throughout the whole of Scotland. I've seen it in some kinship care policies of the age of being 21. So it really varies depending on the local authority, and it's something that I would urge for it to be put into the kinship care policy so that it's clear, and any legal rights to appeal. I don't know if Rona would like to say anything about that, or no?
Legal rights to appeal for, Anne, sorry?
So in terms of being an adult, so if the child was now 16, they would be an adult, they would be able to be a carer. We have had people on the helpline that have called up that I know are kinship carers and they're 17, or just when they've been 16. So I know it does happen, yet there is some councils out there who will not look at assessing a young person until they are at least 18 or 21. So
it depends on the legal status of the child. You know, if they're on a permanence order, then, you know, that lasts until they're 18, although the residence aspect of that doesn't apply after the age of 16. But if you're talking about a child who's on a compulsory supervision order themselves, then the question really would arise about how appropriate that child would be looking after a younger sibling if they themselves, on a compulsory basis, require the guidance, control and treatment that would bring. But it's just, again, it highlights the lack of consistency throughout the country, and that can be really, I think that can make people feel very unsettled, because you know, you're not sure until you actually approach the local authority what their views are going to be on it, also about what kind of support that you're going to be given. And I know with kinship carers, one of the things they don't want to do is get the backup of the local authority, because they rely on them, you know, to give them so much support, and because so much is discretionary and based on what the local authority policy is, they don't want to antagonise. So it would be so much easier for this, and with so many other aspects of kinship care, if there was a definite national policy that people could really refer to. And that's something that we are desperately trying to create through the Kinship Care Advice Service Scotland. You know, that really is one of our fundamental goals, is to try and get some consistency and to be able to regulate what's happening for kinship carers. But definitely when it comes to siblings, you know, already it can be quite daunting, the thought of, you know, taking on the system at such a young age. And if you don't even have that unequivocal information that you can rely on, then I just think it's disempowering for people and unfair. So try and leave it with us.
Great stuff.
Thanks, Rona.
Thank you very much. Okay, so there's a final question. If anybody else who is on the webinar would like to ask questions to the panel, now is the time to use the Q&A function to fire the questions in there. While anybody is considering doing that, so let me just talk through the other question, the remaining question that's on there. So basically, the question is from an anonymous attendee, and they have been dealing with a family where a group of siblings have actually been split between different outcomes. So we're looking at kinship care, possibly adoption in there as well. And there's been no family that felt that they could put themselves forward, especially for the youngest sibling that's been born. And this is the one that's moved on to be adopted. So the question after all of that is that, is it enough to explain to the siblings in an age-appropriate way what's happened to their siblings? Life story work obviously is not as the usual way, but the real crux of the question is that what was mentioned earlier on about missing siblings that they've never met, you know, how siblings instinctively know that there is another sibling out there. So is it enough to explain to the siblings that they have in an age-appropriate way? I suppose the person that is basically thinking about, should they take it further? Should they actually, you know, initiate links, possibly as a worker? You know, how you actually leave a breadcrumb trail, perhaps, to make it easy. Those are the kind of issues, I suppose, that's coming out of the question. Kate, you're nodding your head most vigorously. Would you like to take on that first?
I'd just say, yeah, it's not enough just to, I mean, I read the whole question, so it sounds like it's fantastic. Relationship being maintained between the two older children, even though they're in different placements. So that's brilliant, and it's about building on that, I guess, by reaching out to the adoptive parents, so finding the worker for the adoptive parents and saying, you know, would you like to have some information about the older siblings? You know, would you like to know more? And could you possibly exchange information? And is there any way that could be built on? But I think just like, you know, baby steps, just kind of trying to encourage that connection. So I think it's important, yes, to do the work, life story work, and to talk about where their younger sibling is and to explain what that means, because adoption isn't going to be necessarily understood, but explain what that means. And then talk about the, you know, would they like you to find out a bit more? And it is about then. I think there's a duty of care in terms of making sure that all the children know about each other at the very least. And for the adopted child, that's gonna be a huge thing for them growing up, knowing that they've got older siblings. So and maybe it is that the adoptive parents are just waiting. They're just waiting for someone to get in touch. It's not that they're opposed to any kind of contact, they just don't know how to go about that. So yeah, reach out.
Yeah. So.
It might be worth mentioning another piece of research that I did with colleagues from Northern Ireland, where we were comparing direct contact rates once children became adopted in Northern Ireland and Scotland. And there are much higher numbers of children after adoption having direct contact with siblings in Northern Ireland, so around 7 in 10, than what we manage in Scotland, which is about just under 1 in 5. But actually, through that research, we also looked at so established adoptive families and their attitude towards contact with siblings in the future. And I think often there's a story told that adopters are resistant to direct contact, and sometimes that is absolutely the case. But actually, we found that 1 in 4 of those families where there wasn't direct contact were considering contact at some future point, and were probably waiting for the brave professional to, you know, pick up the phone to make that initial contact and to start that conversation with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just say, if you watch Sandy's story, that's exactly Sandy's brothers, the twins, were adopted, and when we made contact with them, they've been waiting for a long time for somebody to make that move.
And I also think that's true from when we were talking earlier about being actively exploring families. When how far does the search go? And I know we all can't, you know, have a lot of resource to this. That's the reality of it. In every authority, we would like to, you know, searching up families, going right back in depth to what Glasgow and Edinburgh have done. But I suppose what I was wanting to just highlight, and Anne, maybe you could talk to this a wee bit more, is about what can local authorities do now that don't have that in place to make sure that they are turning over every stone before, you know, they consider a child going to foster care, or, you know, a gatekeeping situation.
I think a family meeting, that process where you've got an independent coordinator who's not involved in decision making at all. So we're not a threat to families. They know we're not out there, we're not making these bigger decisions, and actually that unlocks a lot of family information. And very often these initial meetings, say it's parents, 2 parents, and they'll be saying to a social worker, there's no family, there's nobody, you're not speaking to my family, you're not speaking to my family. And if you go in as an independent coordinator, you can very often unlock that, because we're not a threat. And that then will say, well, and it'll be like, oh, you could speak to my mum, or you could speak to my uncle, and they'll give you names and addresses quite readily often. These people are there, but they're not there, they're invisible. And it's actually pulling them in. So that, when I said that preparation stage is long, it's about doing that. So you can go from something that might look like a family meeting with 2 or 3 people, 3 or 4, to 20. You know, we will have a room of 20 people, all with something to offer. That makes it, yeah. So you're trying to just, the Netherlands talk about broadening the circle. Eidencrack is the name of the family group decision making service, and it's about widening the circle. And so every meeting and every conversation you have, you want to try and widen that circle and get as much information. I mean, some of it's good old-fashioned social work, sitting down doing a genogram with a family. You know, if you and it's, for some reason, I think sometimes that gets a bit lost. But you know, that should be a minimum in a child's file. A properly, you know, I mean, we're aiming high, rightly. I think we should, but I think we need to aim for properly researched, because we know that we're told untruths by some family members. And we don't always
get that what you're saying there about someone being independent from the process of working with the parents might actually be of benefit, because often the social worker's got a lot on their plate at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe doing a parental capacity assessment. So looking for family members and that might be living at a distance, or different
Yes.
things that are going on, and that might need a full assessment as well.
Yeah.
So you can understand why it happens, but I think
totally.
we no longer can just say there is no family
No.
and move on. It has to be evidenced and fully thought about in a process somewhere along the line, that it's been evidence that the search has begun, and what it has actually came up with, whether that's to maintain relationships or for the child to go to kinship.